Yeah, as Joe and Alice have said, this evening we're going to be thinking through a little bit more. In fact, the topic that we started thinking about at lunchtime today, which is what we do with the fact that the world is messy, broken, and painful. It means that this evening we're going to be thinking about some difficult things. It may well stir up some difficult emotions among some of us. And so I want to say right up at the beginning that if at any point during the evening you either need to check out or indeed leave, either check out physically or mentally, then please do take some space if you need it as we talk through things. Because as we face up to reality, we have to face up to the fact that reality can hurt. That it doesn't feel like it's how it should be. As I said, I worked as a doctor in the northeast of England for about 7 years or so, and I said this last night. When you work as a doctor, there are always some patients who you look after as a doctor who will forever be seared on your memory. You'll never forget them. When I think about this topic of suffering and the pain in the world, there's one lady I think of in particular, and her family. She was in her early 30s. And I looked after her whilst I was working in palliative care. I was working as a junior doctor in a hospice. And as I say, she was in her early 30s. She had a 5-year-old son and a 6-month-old baby. And she had terminal breast cancer. And she was dying. We in the hospice were fighting hard to try and get her pain under control. And to be totally honest, we were really struggling. She was in a lot of pain. And she was in the last few days and weeks of her life. And during the time that she was in the hospice, I had the privilege of looking after her and then spending a lot of time with her husband over a period of about a month and a half. And we had a lot of long, tear-drenched conversations, her husband and I. And he would go through the same questions that you would imagine every single husband in his position would ask. Every single time we talked, it would come around to the question, why? Why has this happened? And he would say, she doesn't smoke, she doesn't drink, she's a great wife, she's a great mum. Why did she get cancer? And then there was one day when out of the blue, he suddenly turned around and asked me, Matt, what do you think about God? And so I answered truthfully, I said, I'm a Christian, I believe in God. And he said, yeah, I thought I did too. But now this. I'm not so sure anymore. And that really does crystallise the question and the problem that we're thinking about today. Why and how can we believe in a God when things like that happen? The philosopher George Bernard Shaw put it a little bit more philosophically when he said this. He said, how are atheists produced? In probably 9 times out of 10, what happens is something like this. A beloved wife, or husband, or child, or sweetheart is gnawed to death by cancer, struck dumb by apoplexy, or strangled by diphtheria. And the looker-on, after praying vainly to God to refrain from such wanton and horrible cruelty, indignantly repudiates his faith in the divine monster and becomes not merely indifferent and sceptical, but even fiercely and actively hostile to religion. And that really just crystallises it, doesn't it? As we look at the world, as we see suffering in other people's lives, whether it's in the lives of people on the news screens every day, or in lives of people we know and love, or as we experience it in our own lives, surely there are only 2 conclusions we can draw. Either God doesn't care, and because that is an abhorrent thought, maybe we should step one further and say he's not there. Either he doesn't care, or he just isn't there. And I want to say right from the outset that I wouldn't count myself as particularly qualified by experience to talk about suffering. I have looked on and looked after many people, like my patient and her husband. But I have not experienced it in my own life to that kind of a degree. Over the last few years, as I'll share a little bit later, I have struggled significantly with my mental health. I've had to seek counselling for anxiety and depression. My wife experienced miscarriages. We experienced miscarriages together when we were seeking to try and have children. But I haven't quite been through something quite like that before. And some in this room might well be going through something of the ringer right now. And I'm really aware of that. And I would say there are no easy answers when it comes to suffering. But I also want to suggest that there are no easy answers. That idea actually goes more for answers which reject God and the idea of God than it does for answers which include him. And you might think, well, that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. Well, then let me ask a question. Does rejecting God actually solve what we call the problem of suffering? Now, immediately, some of us are going, of course it does, right? If you reject God, then you haven't got a problem, because it's just the way things are. No God, no problem. We just get on with it. Life is just like that, right? Then why is it that when suffering happens, our instinctive reaction is to say, this isn't right. Things should not be this way. About a year ago, I was scrolling through Twitter, as you do, and came across someone who I actually know who had just announced on Twitter that her wife had died suddenly. And she was in agony, and this is what she wrote. It feels very discombobulating to be an atheist and yet want to rage and rage and rage at the sheer cosmic injustice of this. Please don't tell me there is a just God. There clearly is not. It was coming out of deep, deep pain and anguish, this idea, but you can hear it in her words, can't you? It should not be like this. This is unjust. This is not how things should be. And the question that I want to ask is, where does that should come from? When we say it should not be this way, where does the idea of should come from? What are we comparing the world to that we think it should not be this way? In fact, more particularly, what are we comparing our suffering to that we say things should not be like this? After all, if this is all there is, then why would we expect anything less from blind, pitiless indifference? And yet we feel it. Somehow we compare the world we live in to a world which doesn't exist, a world we've never known, and yet a world which deep down we know we would recognise if we saw it. A world where those shoulds exist and the should nots don't. See, people probably often say that present the problem of suffering as though it is a real problem for belief in God. And that is fair. It is a problem which everybody needs to face. And people who believe in God need to face up to it as a problem, but calling it a problem gives away too much. Because it can only be a problem if we assume a standard against which we can measure it. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that if you use the problem of suffering as a reason to dismiss God, then you are essentially in the position of someone who is hijacking the Christian car in order to crash it into a tree. The only reason you can crash it is because you're driving it in the first place. You need the standard, a source of the standard, to be able to say that something is unjust. You need to know what justice is. And the question is, where does that standard come from? And why is it that we are so instinctive that we know it's there, even though we have never experienced a world that actually measures up? What are we looking for? What are we looking for? And now, some as we've started, you might be sitting there thinking, well, this is just downright insensitive. That insensitive to ask, to suggest that dismissing God doesn't make the problem go away. Just insensitive to even think of it like this. But one of the things we want to do as we talk about these huge issues, in a world that is so often the enemy of the important, the urgent is the enemy of the important, we're giving an opportunity this week to pause and think about some of these important things. We want to give opportunity to actually discuss it. And so as Joe and Alice said earlier on, we are going to pause at different points this evening to have an opportunity to stop and discuss. For you to sit and talk about some of these things and how you figure it out. And on your tables you'll find a couple of sheets of paper with some questions on them that look a bit like this. And they are simply prompts for discussion. Now, it might be that you don't really want to talk, and that's fine. You can sit there and just listen to the hubbub, as people do. It might be that you want to talk about something completely different. That's totally fine as well. And certainly don't feel like you have to talk to literally everybody around your table. But perhaps turn to the person next to you, and it might be that there's something that's already triggered like a strong reaction in you from what I've said, and you just want to turn and go, well, that was rubbish. I don't agree with that. That's fine. I'm not going to be offended if you're disagreeing with me. Just turn to the person next to you and tell them why. But if you want a prompt of discussion, here are a couple of questions just to get us going. How do you think our reactions to suffering reveal our sense of what the world should be like? And how would you account from what you believe, how would you account for where that should comes from? There's 2 questions to get us going. I'll give you a few minutes and then I'll be back. Well, I'm going to break into your conversations there as we carry on thinking about this. Don't worry, that's not the last time you're going to be able to sit where you are and chat with those around you about this. There'll be at least another 2 opportunities before we finish. But I guess you could be thinking, okay, fine, right, if you are arguing that we can't jettison God, that somehow we need to maintain and retain a standard of justice, call it God if you want, to be able to say that suffering is a bad thing, then surely haven't I just made the problem even worse? Because if we can't say God isn't there, then isn't the only thing that's left that God clearly doesn't care? Is that all we've got left? A few years ago, Stephen Fry was asked what he would say if he ever met God. And interestingly, just recently, the clip went viral again, so you may well have recently seen it. Famously, he said, what would I say if I met God? I'd say, bone cancer in children. What's that about? How dare you create a world where there is such misery that's not our fault? It's not right. It is utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world that is so full of injustice and pain? And just as an aside, notice that Stephen Fry himself is appealing to standards of goodness, evil, justice and injustice in order to make his argument to reject God. He is driving the Christian car in order to be able to crash it into a tree, because those standards come from God and from the notion of God. And if you want an absolute standard, you need an absolute standard that's beyond us. But doesn't he put it so well? Ask that question, okay, does God just not care? Is he actually even wicked? Well, that really is the question that was in the air as Jesus, in John's account of Jesus' life, visited the grave of a dear friend. What you have on your tables, these grey and yellow booklets, is a copy of, as I've been saying every night, pretty much the most famous book ever written in human history. It's a copy of one of the gospel accounts, the Gospel of John, the account of Jesus' life written by a friend of his. And around about halfway through this account, we arrive at a graveside with Jesus, and we see this question: does Jesus care? Does God care about suffering? So what I'd love you to do is to grab one of these copies of John and see if you can find page 64, which is where John tells us that episode in Jesus' life. it turns out that Jesus had 12 friends, 12 disciples that he hung around with for an awful lot of his life. But it turns out that actually, unsurprisingly, he had a bunch of other friends as well. And three of them in particular were two sisters called Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus. And they were very dear friends to Jesus, according to this account of his life. And at this point in the account, it turns out that Lazarus, the brother, is extremely sick. So sick, it looks as though he is going to die. So open up to page 64, very bottom of the page, little number 3. John just tells us something very straightforward and expected, unsurprising. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is ill. Imagine next week, while you're here at University of Nottingham, you get a call from home. Maybe an email or a message or a phone call. Someone in your family or a very dear friend is very unwell. And they're wanting to let you know. What do you do with that? If you can, you go, don't you? You go to be with your friend, your family member, and their family. You go to spend time with them, not necessarily because you can do anything about it, but because presence says something. It says, I care. And actually, your presence there is also important for you as well. If you're a dear friend of that person who's so ill they might well die, it's important that you can make it to that bedside if you can. So what does Jesus do when he gets this response, this message? Well, actually, it's even more than that in the context of John's Gospel. It's not just that John is depicting Jesus as a good friend of Lazarus and Mary and Martha, who's hearing the news about his dear friend who's unwell. In the context of the story, Jesus has been depicted as a miracle worker. He has healed a paralysed man, he has healed a blind man, he has done amazing things in the context of the story. And the point is, whatever you may think of those miracle accounts, Mary and Martha in the story believe them. Totally believe them. Which means for Mary and Martha, Jesus isn't just a dear friend. He's also an amazing man who potentially could help. This isn't just information sharing, this is a cry for help that Mary and Martha make. Lord, the one you love is sick and it looks as though he's going to die. Please, come and help. So how does Jesus respond? Turn over the page to page 66. Very top of the page. When he heard this, Jesus said, this illness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he went straight away. That's what you'd expect, isn't it? He went to be with him straight away. He loves him, so he went to be with him. But that's not what John tells us. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. Which in the context of the account of Jesus' life that John is writing makes no sense. Why would he do that? And immediately it raises a vital question. In fact, a vital idea. Is it possible that Jesus could have a good reason for not going? Which, when zoomed out to its biggest extent, is basically asking the question, is it possible that God could have a good reason for allowing suffering to happen that could even outweigh how bad it is? And as I ask that question, you might be thinking, well, if you were being insensitive earlier on, now you're just being downright offensive. Don't hear me wrong, I'm not saying that suffering is not bad. I am simply asking, is it possible that God could have reasons, good reasons, that outweigh how bad it is? Is it possible? Could we even allow that as an idea? And before you just dismiss it entirely, try and stay with me just for a bit longer. One of the things that I did when I was working as a doctor was for about 4 to 6 months I worked on a ward looking after people with end-stage diabetes. Now, many of you may know diabetes, may know people who have diabetes, and you may think, well, hang on a minute, I've got friends who have diabetes, and I understand that it really affects their life, and they have to kind of be really careful about their blood sugar levels and stuff, but a hospital ward devoted to caring for people with end-stage diabetes, what's that about? Well, if your sugar levels are really badly looked after for long enough, one of the things that will do is it will destroy the small nerves at the end of your hands and your feet. So you lose sensation. Which meant the people I was looking after on that ward were people like the man who had to have his second leg amputated because he had been walking around for a month with a stone in his shoe and had not realised. Ask a man like that if there's a possibility that there's a good reason for feeling pain, and he will give you a very, very clear answer. And the point is, as we ask these questions, is it possible that there is a good reason for pain? When we feel pain, when we see pain, the cry rises up within us and says, this is wrong. Something is wrong. Something somewhere is wrong. And so we start to look for reasons, don't we? We start to ask why, but we're not just asking, when we ask why, Rosie was helping us think earlier on at lunchtime, that when we ask why, we often want meaning, but we also often want a cause. We want to lay a blame somewhere. And as we expand that out to the biggest things that we have no control over, like huge earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, then instinctively what happens in a lot of us is we cry alongside King Lear, like flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. And we lay the blame for things at a God who seems not to care. But the question is there an alternative? Is there an alternative possible explanation that suffering could be pointing us towards? When it says there is something wrong, could we look somewhere else? And John and the other writers of the Bible will consistently insist that God is good. Not just that he is good, but actually he is goodness. He is goodness itself, personified, the source of all goodness. That is how you define him. And that he made people for relationship with himself as the source of all goodness. But here's the thing. People for relationship with a creator. A relationship with a creator is not a symmetrical thing. A creature and a creator are not the same thing. And so a relationship with a creator is far more akin to something like a kingdom and subjects. But people for relationship means people whose decisions are significant. It means people who will either decide to serve that creator in relationship with him or not. And so what we have is either one kingdom with a king who is the source of all goodness and 8 billion subjects enjoying the source of all goodness, or 8 billion individual kingdoms of me, each with their own individual definitions of what is right and what is wrong. And if you have 8 billion individual kingdoms of me, you have 8 billion individual kingdoms which don't mesh together. And suffering is often the result. Directly, sometimes, as I suffer because of things I choose to do or things others choose to do. And then also indirectly, as we suffer the results of the fact that we have fractured our relationship with our Creator, and as a result, fractured our relationship with creation itself. And the thing is, if it's that big, if the problem that suffering could be pointing to is that big, what possible solution could there be? And that is where Jesus becomes both his most compelling and most divisive. Because in the middle of his friends, Mary and Martha's bereavement, Jesus has the gall to point to what their suffering directs us to. Have a look at little number 14 on page 66 if you've still got that account open. So he told his disciples plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. but let us go to him. In other words, Jesus points at Mary and Martha's pain and says, it's going to point to me. It's going to point to me. What kind of a person says that? What kind of a person says of their dear friend's bereavement, it's going to point to me as the solution to this problem? Either someone who's spectacularly misguided and you should not give a moment's thought to, or someone who is spectacularly confident that he knows exactly who he is and who he claims to be. So, what does Mary and Martha's pain tell us about Jesus? It tells us two things. And actually the first thing it tells us is that it turns out he does care. Let's read on. Little number 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. You can hear the agony in the sister's voice, can't you? If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Just a little bit later on, Mary does come to join him. And she says exactly the same thing. Little number 32 on the next page, page 68. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. You can hear the hint of accusation. Don't you care? I thought you were our friend. Not only that, we thought you were the miracle worker who was doing all of these amazing things and our friend, so why weren't you here? Do you not care? It does turn out that Jesus does care. So much so that the crowd around can see it. Verse 34, where have you laid him, he asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. And then the Jews said, see how he loved him. See, the crowd can see it because Jesus feels it. He feels the pain as he stands in front of his dear friend's grave. This is the wonder of the claim that Jesus is God become human, which stands at the centre of Christianity. The wonder of the claim that when God reveals himself to us, he does it by speaking in the language of being a human. Inhuman. That he joins us. He steps into our mess, sits in the muck and identifies with us. Do you know the word compassion literally means to suffer with? This is the ultimate demonstration of compassion. Suffering with. In Jesus, the claim is God joins us. But you know what? That doesn't solve the problem. Not even close. Great, so he's joined us. Now he's feeling it too as a human. What good does that actually do? That's the question the crowd ask. Some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? What good is it that he's feeling the pain? Because in the end, the thing that somebody who is really suffering wants and needs is not so much mere compassion, not even just an explanation. We want a solution. And that's the second thing that this points us to about Jesus. He cares and he acts. Listen to John's account. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odour. He's been dead there for 4 days. Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they might believe you sent me. And when he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. It's an astonishing moment, full of tension. Whatever it is that you believe about what is happening right here, enter the story with me for a minute. Imagine the scene that John is painting. A tomb has just been opened and a man has just called out to the dead man inside it, come out. Can you imagine the moment of silence that followed? The beat. Is this really happening? Is this really happening? And then the gasp, when a man literally walks out of death. Because that is what John depicts for us. That in the presence of Jesus, death itself works backwards. Imagine the way the crowd would feel in that moment, the thrill of hope that rises. Are all the sad things coming untrue? And in this moment, John will argue this is a window into God's purposes in sending Jesus in the first place. Sending Jesus to undo our mess. Sending Jesus to undo all the fractures that we have caused by turning away from God as our creator. Because in just a few days, Jesus is going to come to another grave. But he's not going to walk to this one. He's going to be carried in, having died his own death. A death that invented the word excruciating. Having done that in order to take on all the consequences of us turning away from our Creator. All of that fractured relationship. And then, John claims, to burst right through the grave. And live a death-proof life. A suffering-proof life. For us. It's not just that God became human so that he could suffer with us as a man. It is that God became human so he could suffer for us as a man. That is the Christian claim. I've been talking for too long, but I want to give you opportunity to discuss this and to respond. And it may well be, as I'm sure some of you are already thinking, this is either it's pie in the sky, or it's rubbish, or it's manipulative, or whatever. Fine. Respond by telling the person next to you why you think that. But here are some other questions that you might want to discuss. Imagine that you got the opportunity to stand in front of Jesus like Mary and Martha did. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. What would you want to say to him? I've said suffering doesn't need an explanation as much as a solution. Do you agree with that? And if so, how do you identify with Mary and Martha's experience? I'll give you a few minutes, and then I'll be back again. One of the other things that we want to do this week, as well as giving opportunity to have space to discuss these important things, is also to hear from someone about how the ideas that we're talking about actually hit the ground in real life, in their life. And so what I'm going to do is invite Eleanor to come and join me. And we're going to hear from Eleanor precisely that, just how some of these ideas that I've been talking about have been felt to be real in her life. So please come and join me, Eleanor. Why don't we welcome Eleanor? Great. So, Ellen, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you study, that kind of thing.
Hi, I'm Eleanor. I'm a second year child's nursing student from Lincoln.
Fantastic. And as we kind of get to know you, it'd be great to hear a little bit about what was your experience of life, but then also of Christianity as you grew up.
I would always have called myself a Christian. Both my parents are Christian. My mum's side of the family is, dad's side not. He became a Christian at uni actually. But always, I had a really, really nice childhood. Close with both my parents. Dad's military, so mostly it was brought up by my mum because he was away quite a bit. Loved by both my parents. Had two younger sisters. It was fairly straightforward. I enjoyed school. My parents did an incredible job at bringing me up and keeping me safe and protecting me. They were actually told they couldn't have kids for about 10 years before me. So when I came along, it was like Operation Cotton Wool, keep me super safe. I was really, really grateful for them and how they brought me up. I was sort of aware of the fact that the bad things happened. I wasn't naive to that, but I'd never really experienced it. Live in quite a small rural village in Lincolnshire. Not much happens there, so there's not really much that could go wrong. As dad's side of the family always seems to bring issues for people, so that was the same in my family. there was a couple of interesting characters, and I could see what a broken family relationship could look like, and sort of the effects of drugs and alcohol, but it was quite distanced from that, quite protected from that. Didn't really feel like it impacted me that much. I always believed there was a God. My dad's quite an intellectual man, and sort of brought me up understanding any claims that he taught me, and if I went to him with any questions, I was always an answer. So I was quite enjoyed my apologetics from quite a young age, so I've always believed there's a God. I think the world only seems to make sense with one in the picture, and so I had a lovely upbringing.
So we're getting you're painting a picture for us. Lovely Lincolnshire village, happy family, awareness of some difficult things in some of your wider family, and then something happened, didn't it, that brought some of those harder, difficult things much more to home in your life.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So my family was my mum and dad, me, a sister Sophia, 2 years younger than me, and my younger sister Charlie was 4 years younger than me. And Charlie was born with a condition called supraventricular tachycardia. Sometimes her heart would start beating really, really rapidly. In my mind, it wasn't really that serious. She just went to hospital sometimes. It was okay. To my parents, it was serious, but never life-threatening. It was well managed. She also had Marfan syndrome, so she was taller than me by the time she was 7. But that sort of, she always had that condition. It was just part of her. Then one day I was in school. I just started secondary school. So year 7, I was about 11, just about to turn 12. I was in the bleep test, and this woman from the office came into the sports hall, told me to grab my bags. She needed to take me to the reception, and I just thought, I don't know, maybe I was getting home early. She walked me into the office, and my grandparents were sat there with my sister Sophia, and they were all crying, and I was going, what's wrong? What's happened? And they went, oh, it's Charlie, she's not very well. And I just think I said something like, yeah, I know, she had a cold, and I don't really know why I thought that would bring them to tears, but that was my first assumption. And then they went, no, she's really, really not very well. She's had a cardiac arrest. I didn't really know what that was. I was only 11. I was sort of a bit stunned. I started crying. I didn't really know what was going on though. And they said, we had to be resuscitated. The paramedics came. They blue lighted her to the hospital. She's really not very well, Eleanor. We're not really sure what her condition is right now. We need to go. So they took me out of school. I was still very unaware of what was awaiting me. I knew my mum and dad were with her. I didn't know what that would look like when I saw her, whether that would be, she was, I don't know, in my head I still kind of thought she might be awake, just not really know who I was, maybe a bit confused. So it was quite a shock when I arrived at the paediatric intensive care unit, and she was hooked up on life support, on a ventilator, and it sort of hit me, oh, this is really not good. My dad is military, quite a scary man initially. I'd never really seen him be emotional, and I remember walking onto the ward and looking at them and seeing them be so broken, and I just I just sort of thought, oh yeah, no, if my dad's looking like this is I don't know what to do. Seeing your sister, watching her die, really, it was tricky. In my head I knew that it wasn't a great situation, but still thought they told me she was in a coma and they were going to try and bring her out in a few days. So I thought, in a few days she'll wake up. I'll make sure I'm around. Sort of stayed in and out of hospital with her for a couple of days, and with my parents who were living in the hospital at the time, and was with my grandparents the rest of the time, and Sophia, my other sister. And sort of this was all happening on the Friday. On the Monday, they were going to try and wake her up, and nothing really happened, nothing really changed. She was having quite a lot of seizures post the arrest, and they were doing some scans to sort of check what was the situation with her brain. She'd been quite a long time without oxygen. The CPR was it was tricky. The paramedics were having quite a lot of trouble with it when they arrived and with her. So she'd been quite a while without oxygen. So these scans were just going to have a little look and see what the situation was, what we were dealing with. And everyone around me still seemed really optimistic. I'm from a small village, like I was saying, and so the teachers that she was in her class with, they'd pop round and check on me every so often, and they were like, we're going to do everything we can to get her back into the school and to be with her friends, and so it was all fairly, as positive as you can be with someone who's hooked up on life support, really. But I, in my head, was like, this is going to be tricky. She might not be exactly the same, but I'll get my sister back. And then, they did these scans, and we were sort of waiting for someone to review them. And I was in the hospital. My sister had stayed home, and I was with my mum and dad. And I spent quite a lot of time sat with her. She was in her coma, and the nurses were so great with me. I remember them sort of they would just talk to her like she was awake, and I'd been a bit scared to speak to her. I thought, I'm going to look so weird. She's not going to chat back to me. But seeing them do it, and it made me feel like I could. So I was sort of sat there chatting away with her. And once I'd given her a bath, she had super long curly hair, so they showed me how to braid her hair, and we did that together. So it was really special for me to have that time, and be with her and just enjoy being around her a little bit. Then I found that it was just almost nice. It was just very, very calm. I was still kind of, this is going to be okay. So that was sort of the start of the week. On the Wednesday I went back home, and I remember I sat on the sofa with my grandparents, and we got this phone call from my mum and dad, and my mum was just sobbing on the other end of the phone. They'd done these first set of scans, and they'd come back, and it was sort of moderate brain damage. She wouldn't, we knew she wouldn't remember any of us, and potentially be a little bit disabled. It was sort of eyesight might be a problem. But it was, it was mild to moderate. They were going to pass it on to a paediatric specialist to have a look at. And this, mum was calling. Someone had a look at it, and the brain damage was severe. She wouldn't be able to speak. She wouldn't be able to live a normal life at all. Maybe not even move. So we were, it was sort of not looking so great. She'd sort of deteriorated a little bit overnight. It was starting to sink in that I probably was going to lose my sister. And I could hear my mum and my dad crying on the phone, and then they passed it on to my grandma, and I could hear my mum talking to my grandma, I'm going to lose my baby, I'm going to lose my baby. And I just remember rocking back and forth all day, thinking God, don't take her from me, don't take her from me. I don't think I can cope if she dies. I don't think I can do this. Just crying out for him to do something, to intercede, to sort this out, because I knew it wasn't right, and I didn't think I didn't know how I was gonna cope with this, or how my family were gonna cope with it. And preparing as well for if she did wake up, if she did come back like this, what was life going to be like? My parents were going to constantly have to be looking after her. Were they going to be able to work? But financially, and I was 11, this was quite a lot to try and process. So that was, really tough. We went down, came to visit my mum and dad in the hospital that night, and I was so angry at God, because I believed he was there. I still believed it only made sense to have God in the picture, but I was like, how can you do this to me? How can you put me through this? I don't like you. I don't like what you're doing to me. I don't like what you're doing to her. She's innocent. She's 7. She's not had time to do anything wrong. Why are you doing this? That was sort of a big low for me. Went back home Thursday. Came into no, I didn't come in the Thursday. I actually went to school that day, and my mum and dad sort of called me to say she's having a really good day, Eleanor. Everything's looking really good. She's not had any seizures. She's picked up a bit. And I was thinking, this is amazing. Like maybe God's heard my prayers. Maybe He's doing something. Maybe she'll be all right. It was a really positive day. Came back into school on a Friday, and then someone came to pick me up and wasn't really telling me what was going on. I just thought, well, maybe they're going to try and wake her up again. She had a really good day yesterday. And they brought me into the hospital. I sat in this, like a wobble room, I think they called it, and there was just really no windows. It was pretty gloomy. And my mum and dad came in, and my dad grabbed my arm and he just started sobbing and just said, Charlie's fought a good fight and she's tried her hardest, but she can't do any more. She's not going to make it. And sort of just went silent for a little bit. I couldn't really believe it. I sort of this initial just disbelief, shock, it's not going to happen, he won't do this to me. I couldn't really wrap my head around what that would look like. I absolutely adored my sister. She was so full of life, and we were all really close, and it was just, what is this going to do? I don't think I'm not going to make this. Just asking God why couldn't it have been me instead? Why could He not have taken me? I just wanted, it felt like I just wanted her to be okay. And I actually just remember saying that, and probably not helpful to my parents, but I just want it to be me instead. I remember my mum sort of went to go and try and one of the doctors wanted to speak to her, and just looking at her and going she waited 10 years to have a child. She carried this baby. She raised her for 7 years, and now she's going to lose her. And how on earth do you cope with that? And we sort of, I needed some air. My mum came with me, and she sort of said to me, Eleanor, I was so angry. Why is he taking her? Why is he could have stopped this. I've prayed. I've asked him to save her. And my mum grabbed me and sort of said, you've got two options here. You reject God, or you cling to Him, Eleanor, because I don't have a clue how we're going to get through this otherwise. And sort of, actually, I'm not sure how I'm going to get through this otherwise. Okay, I'll try. If my mum could do it, why couldn't I? This was her child. I was still not particularly happy, obviously not happy with what was going on, still angry, still hurt, but it was sort of, acknowledged that if I was going to be able to go and say goodbye to my sister, I needed God with me to do that. So we walked into the room and watched her die, got to, hold her hand and sit with her, and they have all these little things that you can do, cut bits of hair and take handprints and stuff, so we did all of that, and then and then got ready to leave her for the last time. So that was sort of the moment that my world hit rock bottom, and I knew what suffering was, and I've never hurt like that ever before, not since.
So you were crying out, why have you let this happen? Since then, years have gone by, you now find yourself training to be a children's nurse in the place where it happened.
Yeah.
How has your faith brought you from where you were then to where you are now?
Yeah. My sister actually died in QMC in the PICU here. I had absolutely no plans of coming to Notts ever again after that. It was always where's the least favourite place, we hate Nottingham, we don't go there. My dad's very location triggered with his grief, so it was, if there was a journey we avoided it, and I don't know why. When I decided to, I applied for nursing because I saw the impact that the nurses that looked after my sister had on me, and on my grief after that. They were incredible, and I can't thank them enough for the way that they handled that and the way they looked after her. So that's sort of what made me want to do nursing. I was like, if I can do that for somebody, then it seems worth it. I don't know why I applied to nurse. I had no intentions of coming. I actually, when I got my offer for an interview, I nearly said no, I didn't want to do it. For some reason, I did it, and then I got an offer, and it was my insurance choice, and I ended up here still, even though I got my firm. So I know that God had other plans, but being here was not something I planned. My faith is the only thing that got me through. I think, like Matt was saying earlier, knowing that this isn't what life is meant to be. You're not meant to, like, children aren't meant to die. That's not, if I believe there was a God, so it was wrestling with, is he a God who doesn't care? Is he a good God? Okay, that he is a good God. He died for me. Like, it was. I had to learn that. Like, get to know his character. Getting to know his character was important. Reading my Bible, seeing, like, time and time again, he's good. And he doesn't promise easy, and he hurt and he lost people like Lazarus. Like, I know that if there is a God, I want a God, like, who can relate, who knows my pain, who's felt worse pain than I have. So reading the Bible is like, if there is a God, this is the God I want, this is my God. Also, I think, like, in the Bible, God promises that everything he does is for the good of those that love him, and he knows the plans that he has for us. And that's sort of a promise that I had to cling to. I'm not pretending that I know exactly why God had this plan and why he chose to take my sister home. I'm not, I would still, if it had been my plan, I'd have done anything I could to keep her. I'd bring her back in a heartbeat, but I have to trust that his plans are better than mine, and know that my sister's in a far better place than here, and if I tried to bring her back, she'd be miserable with me, because there's nowhere that she wants to be more than where she is. And I was sort of saying to Matt earlier, actually, like, I'm just jealous, really, because she was so young when she died that she never had to lose anyone, she never had to feel this pain. She's just got to go somewhere where that shit is, and so that, like, the promise that he's done this for my good, for her good, and knowing that she's in a place far better than here, and I said I would have, in a heartbeat, without a thought, stepped in and taken that for my sister if I could have, but she actually gets to spend her eternity with someone who did die for her, and as tricky as it is for me to comprehend, like, who loves her far better than I ever could. And actually, like, my faith enabled me to view death differently. People say to you, like, I'm sorry for your loss, and I say to people, I lost my sister, but something's lost when you don't know where it is, and I know exactly where my sister is, and I think that is something that has got me through.
Eleanor, thank you so much for sharing that, and for being really brave to be able to share some really vulnerable things. Thank you so much. Please say thank you to Eleanor. We're going to draw things to a close now. You'll be pleased to hear, I'm sure. These are big things we've been thinking about. In so many ways, suffering is like a question looking for an answer. It's pain which yells at us that there is something wrong, there is a problem somewhere. And when we ask our whys, it's as though we are casting around to try and figure out what that problem is and how it might be solvable. And the account that we have seen of Jesus' life, the claims that John makes about him, suggests that it is not the problem of a heartless God, but the problem of the human heart. And that neat answers won't in the end help, but that Jesus' power and his care will. Because he's the one who suffers with us, and he's the one who suffers for us. He is the one who went through death and burst through the other side. And so what I want to do, just as we close, is just to step back from that story we heard from John's account of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And just for a minute, just ask where we are in that story. For some of us, it might well be that we are in the crowd, watching on, seeing Mary and Martha in pain before the grave of their brother, hearing stories like that from Eleanor, seeing on the news every day, and watching on and asking, couldn't the one who opened the eyes of the blind man have stopped this one from dying? Couldn't he have done something? For some of us in the room, and for all of us one day, we will be where Mary and Martha were, feeling the hurt, feeling the pain, standing in front of the Lord saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, or Lord, if you'd been here, my sister would not have died. But there is one other place where if the Bible promises, if we put our faith and if we entrust ourselves to the Lord Jesus, we will find ourselves. And that is where Lazarus is. As he hears the voice of Jesus say, come out. It's the hope that drives Eleanor, that she knows that her sister heard, Charlie, come out. And that is the hope that Christianity holds out. And it is such a good hope. It's why the Christian Union run events like this. It's why Rosie and I do the jobs that we do what we do in coming to try and share this hope. And it is what we long that you will look into. It is such a good hope. It is worth looking into to see whether or not it is grounded in reality. And we believe it is grounded in reality, and there is good reason to believe it to be so. And so what I would love you to do is to do one of a few things. It might be that you would like to take away one of these copies of John's account of Jesus' life and read it through and reckon with the claims about Jesus. Figure out what it is that you think about him. What do you make of his claim to be God? And what do you make of the claim that he died and he rose again in history? Or it might be that you want to spend some time thinking a little bit more deeply. Over on the bookstall over here, there is a book of more stories of people who have found hope through hard times. A book called Why Me? There are about 10 of those, so please come over and grab one, take it away and read, and you'll be able to hear more people speaking a little bit like Eleanor did. Or if this has really stirred you up tonight, then I would love you to come and take, we've only got one copy of this book, but it's called Where is God in All the Suffering? And if this has really stirred you up tonight and you would like to come and get this copy of this book from me, I'd love to give it to you. Come over and find me and we can chat and I'll give you this copy of this book. Or it might even be that you are beginning to think, I think this might be true. And boy is it good. I'm beginning to recognise that perhaps Jesus is who he says he is, and I want to entrust myself to him as the only one who can solve the problem that suffering points to. If that's where you are, talk to the person you came with, and perhaps talk to him. After all, it's the most natural thing in the world to talk to the person who loves you. We're going to leave things there for the night. The bell is ringing. We'll give you a couple more minutes to just give an opportunity to respond to some of the things that you've heard. If you just want to sit quietly and reflect on some of this, that's absolutely fine. If you would like to think a little bit more and just ask a bit more questions, then why not revisit that one? What would you say to Jesus if he was standing in front of you? Couldn't he have done something? Brother, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. What would you say if he was standing right in front of you? We'll give you a few minutes just to reflect, to discuss if you'd like to, and then Joe and Alice will come and close us for the evening. Thanks so much for listening tonight.